Okay, thank you. Wow. Nice to see everybody here. You're a little far away, to tell you the truth. I'm going to move my chair up. You could do the same if you want to. Just a tiny little, scooch up a little tiny bit. Thank you if you do that. And if you don't want to, that's fine too. It's okay. This is one of those gatherings where every single person, every story so far, as you're listening, you think, oh yeah, that reminds me. And that's just a small number of the people here. I'm sure everybody else here, if we get going, we could be here all night. Ellie, you got the keys, right? We could stay if we wanted to. Going back to Ruby, to your story, sir, I used to live on Croft Street, at 22 Croft Street, when it was not a fancy, you know where Croft is? Between Borden and Lippincott, just runs north from College Street. Anybody know where? And I used to live in a little apartment over a garage, and my landlord was Abe Morgenstern, and I always knew when he was coming because I could smell his cigar coming up from College Street. He was smoking these big old cigars. No one ever smokes cigars like that anymore. And he told me that my apartment used to be where the cabbies, many of them were Jewish at the time, would come to play cards after their shift. So I used to live in a poker den, basically. So that was Croft Street. All of these stories too, that beautiful story about your father, and I don't know how many of you have grew up with a family story of spirit or something appearing from the other side. I did, yeah. Maybe we'll have time to tell some of those too. And so most recently, I had a job at Baycrest as a storyteller in residence. And that was probably the greatest job I've ever had in my storytelling. I think Marcia Sokolowski's here from Baycrest. There are other people from Baycrest too. You're here. I met you there as well. Anybody else here have a connection to Baycrest? So, yeah, had a wonderful time. I spent quite a bit of time in the psychiatry ward and the palliative care unit, and working with people who had degrees of dementia, whatever that is. I remember one time over at the what's the place called? I'm forgetting what the name of the building is. No, the one right connected to the hospital where
Apotex Center.
Apotex. Thank you. See, here we go. Book me in. At Apotex, we were doing a little session, and I passed a wooden spoon around, and I was asking people if it reminded them of anything. And yeah, sure enough, memories of soup came up, and it came to one gentleman, and he took the wooden spoon, and he smiled, and he said, he held up the wooden spoon, and he said, "I love soup." And I said, yeah, me too, love soup. What's your favorite soup? Well, guess what? That was a silly question, because if you lose your nouns and you lose your names. And this gentleman could not think of the name of his favorite soup. Well, we all probably know what it was. It was a Jewish place. I'm sure it was chicken soup, but he couldn't think of that. So he took the wooden spoon and he smiled and he looked at me. He said, I'd eat my soup without the names. I thought, there's a lot to this dementia business we don't really know, because he said everything that's important about soup, the last thing is the name, right? So I thought I'd maybe just tell you a little bit about Baycrest, because I heard such interesting stories there. I went up as a teller, but also, I suppose, more as a listener to people's stories. And the first story I heard was from a woman. This is a little on the risque side, but she's sitting there volunteering at the Second Cup. I don't know if they still have the Second Cup. Marcia, do they? Yeah. So in the big atrium, this woman's sitting there. She's in her 90s. She's a volunteer, and she hears, "Oh, this is Dan. He's going to be around as a storyteller." So she looks up and says, "You want to hear a joke?" I said, "Okay." Actually, that's not the first thing she said. The first thing she said was, "I'm a suicide survivor." Okay. I'm Dan. And then she said, you want to hear a joke? So we get to the joke part. And she says, an old woman goes into the men's lounge over at the terraces, and the guys are playing cards. It's not a separate lounge, but the guys are playing cards. And she walks in, she holds up her hand, and she says, if anybody can guess what's in my hand, they can come to my room and have sex with me. And an old guy looks up and says, is that an elephant? She said, close enough. So I was surprised to hear, so here's this woman who's told me already she's been through a hard time, she's telling jokes. And then when I went to the psychiatry program, it was the same thing. Apparently, our sense of humor is one of the last things to go. And even in this really difficult circumstances of being treated for clinical depression, people were really... I remember going onto the floor, it was the 4th floor, and people would come to the group shuffling down the hall. Yeah. Like zombies, right? And they come to gather, and all of a sudden I'm hearing jokes again. And one woman tells this joke. She was a Holocaust survivor. And she says, the guy comes to the rabbi. A lot of these jokes start with the guy comes to the rabbi. He says, Rabbi, I don't know what to do. I had my best friends in the whole world over, and we were having a nice time, and when they left, I couldn't find my Rolex. I don't know what to do. These are my best friends in the world. And the rabbi said, well, I have an idea. He says, the rabbis in these stories always have good ideas. He says, wait a couple of weeks and invite them all back, the same group. And as you're talking, introduce the topic of ethics. Ethics. And talk about the 10 Commandments. And when you get to the commandment, thou shalt not steal, you look around the group. You take a good look in everybody's eyes. You will find the thief, guaranteed. Thank you, Rabbi. He comes back a while later, and he's wearing his Rolex. And the rabbi said, did you do what I suggested? I said, I did. All my best friends in the world came over. We were talking about ethics, and I was mentioning the 10 Commandments, and I got down so far as to say, thou shalt not commit adultery, and I remembered where I left my watch. That's too terrible a joke to applaud in a synagogue here, and with a rabbi next to me, and another one down the aisle. And another one I again heard on the 4th floor. And I promise after these couple of jokes, we'll maybe tell a story longer. But anyway, the rabbi sees there's a young man in the shul who's always looking so sad. He's looking so disconsolate. He just sits there, forlorn. And one day the rabbi comes up and says, what's wrong? I see you here. You just don't look happy at all. He says, what's going on? Tell me. You can tell me. You can talk to me. I'm your rabbi. And he says, Rabbi, I don't know what to do. Every girl I bring home, every single girl I bring home, my mother hates her. Every single girl I try, every single one, my mother hates her. The rabbi says, I have an idea. He says, tell you what, you look for a girl, you look for a young woman who looks like your mother, dresses like your mother, cooks like your mother, sings like your mother, has the same voice, dresses like your mother, has the same mannerisms as your mother. I think it'll go much better. A couple of weeks later, he's looking even worse. The rabbi said, what happened? Did you take my advice? He said, oh, yes, I did. He says, I found a woman, she was just like my mother, looked like, talked like, walked like, cooked like, everything, just like my mother. And the rabbi said, so what happened? He said, my father hates her. So I was there for 5 years, and that's where Marcia and I became friends, and it was such an honor to just be able to go to a place like that and do storytelling. We used to call it story care. where it's not only care for the body in the hospital, but it's also how do you care for people's stories? How do you show that you value the stories that people bring to these pretty extreme places? Palliative care, you can't get more extreme than that. And one time, maybe this will be the last little, well, maybe there are a couple more, but anyway, one time I met a man, he'd just come onto the floor, palliative care. I walked into his room to introduce myself, and he was surrounded by women, just wonderful women. His wife, his sisters, his daughters, they were all in the room. And he spread his arms out wide and he smiled at me and said, "Look, I won the lottery." So I got to know him, and he was a funny man. He loved jokes. Oh, a few weeks later, I'm walking by a room, and there he is dying. And you probably know in palliative care they call it actively dying. I mean, there's that phase, the last few hours. And his wife is there, his daughter's there. So I went in to pay my respects, and I said, "I really enjoyed meeting your husband, your dad. Wonderful guy, great sense of humor." They're nodding. And I turned to leave. And then I just had a funny feeling. I turned back and I said to his wife, Did Milton have, and they said I could use his name, so did Milton have a favorite joke? And she looked up at me and she said, "Yeah, he did." So I said, "Would you tell it to me?" So over her husband's, right over the bed, she looks up and she tells this story. This was Milton's favorite joke. I'll tell it to you. So the Pope needed a heart transplant. And the Pope went out on the balcony of the Vatican, and he looked out at St. Peter's Square, and thousands of people were there. And the Pope said, "My people, my faithful flock, my cardiologist has told me that without a new heart, I will die. And so I would like to ask one of you faithful members of the Christian congregation, would one of you donate your heart so that I, your Pope, may live?" Thousands of people lifted their hands and called out, "Take my heart, take my heart." I don't know why they have bad Italian accents, but that's how I heard it. "Take my heart," thousands. And the Pope was very moved by this, of course, and the Pope looked out and said, "Thank you. It is what I expected of you. But let us look for a sign from God so that I should know whose heart I should accept." And at that moment, a white dove was flying over St. Peter's Square, and a feather fell from the wing of the dove. And the Pope said, "That is the sign from God that I was looking for. Whoever the feather lands on, that person will give up your heart so that I, the Pope, may live." Everyone's watching the feather. Everyone's calling, "Take my heart!" That story became part of her eulogy for her husband.
That's great.
Yeah. And this is one of those moments too where you can't make it up. I was leaving the room and I had a parka. It was wintertime, and the parka, you could tell it's a storyteller's parka, kind of used and a little ripped up. But anyway, a feather popped out of the parka, and it flew over, like it floated right over him, over his bed, and his wife looked at the feather and she said, "You always like to have the last word." Yeah. To your story. So I just, look, we're in Ellie's house, so to speak, and Ellie is a man who loves a good joke too. So before I tell you one more story, a little bit longer story, I'm going to ask you to tell us one of your favorites.
Well, you're thinking about Jewish humor and Jewish jokes. One of my favorite jokes is about this Jewish man who was about to be sentenced by a judge. The judge says, "Mr. Goldberg, do you have any last words before I sentence you because we have a confession. He says, what is the confession today? It says, I should apologize. I'm guilty. I stole a chicken. Right? He says, and you sign the confession. He says, oh, you're not reading it right, Judge. He says, I should apologize. I stole a chicken. I'm guilty.
It's all how you say it. Yeah. Some of you, thank you, Ellie. Thank you, Ellie. If you read the Star, I had a little article, not last Monday, but the Monday before, about how Jews we're probably better tellers than listeners. You know, there are even jokes about that. You know, someone starts a joke and the other, no, I heard that, and that's not how it goes anyway. Pretty typical. And how when God was about to tell us that we were to be the we got so impatient we assumed he was going to say chosen, and we ran out. We're the chosen ones. We're the chosen people. But he was really going to say choosing. We just didn't have the patience to stay and listen. So I have a theory we're the choosing people, and in history, of course, all throughout, we're often the people who ask the big questions, get into trouble, suffer for it. The choosing people. Anyway, it's a little bit about King Solomon, and the story that I love so much about King Solomon was that he had a dream when he was a young king, and in the dream, he hears a voice that says, I will give you a gift. You can choose power, wealth, or a long life. And Solomon says, I choose to have the gift of a listening heart, the gift of wisdom. So anyway, if you have a chance to look it up, it's if you look up the listening heart, it's in the Star, and it really reflects on what does it mean. Can you even talk about living with a listening heart in times like these? What would wisdom even look like? And anyway, at the end of the article, I mentioned our Seder this year, where we, a part of the Seder, you tell stories. It's not only the official stories that you're remembering, it's also personal stories. My mother, for example, speaking of moms, I grew up with this story. She went through the war in Bucharest with her mother. Her father had been kicked out by the fascists, so she didn't see him for 7 years. She and her mom were in Bucharest. Now the Red Army shows up, and the Nazis finally leave. But of course, she and her mom, my mom was a beautiful 16-year-old girl, they were just as terrified of the Red Army as they were of the fascists. So middle of the night, there's a knock on their tiny little apartment door, and 2 Russian officers show up. And they say, in some language that they could find to communicate with them, they say, we are billeted here, we're staying here tonight. Well, they just had the one bed. And so my mother's hiding in the apartment. Her mother said, go hide. So the 2 Russian officers come in, and they are terrified. And then one of them speaks Yiddish to the other one. And my grandmother looks at them and says, you're Jewish? They say, we're Jewish. And she calls out to my mom, there are brothers, come out. So they were liberated by Jewish officers of the Red Army. So that was one of our Seder stories. And another one, and you might know this, I think it's become a famous Holocaust story, but I heard it from the Greek guys who sell coffee at the farmer's market at Witchwood Barns. If you ever go to the Saturday market, go to Curtis Coffee, ask them for this story, because on the island of Zakynthos, you know the story, Ellie, the Nazis showed up, and they called the mayor and the bishop, Metropolitan Bishop, Greek Orthodox Bishop, to their office, and they said, we're rounding up all the Jews to send them to the camps. So by tomorrow, we want you to have a list of every Jew on the island of Zakynthos. And the mayor and the bishop leave. And the next day, they come back and they say, here's the list. And there were 2 names on that list, their own. And meanwhile, every Jew on the island had been taken to safety in the mountains, and none of them was deported to the camps. That was another Seder story. And one more, which I'll just tell you, I have an acquaintance who lives near Ramallah. He's a Palestinian named Suleiman Khatib. Suleiman went to jail at the age of 14 in an Israeli jail. And while he was there, he learned Hebrew. He read Anne Frank. He read Nelson Mandela. He read Martin Luther King. And when he came out, 10 years later, he founded Combatants for Peace. And that was another one of our Seder stories. And he renounced violence. So to imagine in these times there are people still advocating for peaceful coexistence. The courage is almost unbelievable. So what does it mean to live with a listening heart nowadays? So, Ellie, I have time to tell one little story? Okay. So in the city of Baghdad a long time ago, there were two friends, Eliezer and Abdallah. And these two friends were very close. They loved each other. They were always visiting each other's homes. And one day, maybe in the mosque, one day in the shul. They were always visiting back and forth, playing together, talking together. They were the best of friends, Eliezer and Abdallah. But they grew older. Time went on, they became adults, and Abdallah moved to the city of Basra and got married and set up his own business. And Eliezer stayed in Baghdad, and with his family, he became a very prosperous merchant. And he sold carpets and textiles and so on. He became very, very wealthy. But he wasn't known for being wealthy. He was known for being generous. And they called him Eliezer Effendi, Lord Eliezer, because he was generous. His villa was open to anybody who was in need. Everybody could come to his door and find help if they needed it. So life went on. Abdallah did not prosper. In the city of Basra, he didn't have a good head for business. Things didn't go well. And one day, his wife said, "Let us move back to Baghdad, and perhaps our luck will change. And you also have told me that you had a good friend, and maybe your friend Eliezer, you've told me stories about him. Maybe he's there and can help us." So they eventually, many years later, now they had lost touch by now, and there's an old proverb that says, "Far from the eye, far from the heart." And so Eliezer and Abdallah had lost contact at this point. Anyway, it moves back to Baghdad. Life is hard. They lived in the poorest part of town. Their children sometimes didn't have enough to eat. And one day his wife said, "Abdallah, Eliezer, you've told me about, your friend from childhood, and now we hear about the Eliezer Effendi, the great and generous Eliezer. Go to him. I think it's your friend. Ask for help." And he said, "I don't want to. It's very hard to come to him as a beggar. He has prospered, and look at me. I'm so poor." And she said, "Well, would you rather hold on to your pride or watch your children starve? Go." And so he went, and he came to the beautiful, beautiful palace of Eliezer Effendi, through the lemon orchards and the jasmine, and all the way to the door, dressed in his rags. And when he came to the door, he knocked on the door, and the doorman opened it. And he said, "Tell your master Eliezer Effendi that his old friend Abdallah has come back to see him." Now he could see what happened next. The doorman walked down a long, long hall to a banquet area. And there at the table was a man, now white-haired, as was Abdallah. They were older now, gray-haired, dressed in beautiful robes. And the message was given, and he saw that man stand up and begin to walk towards the door. It was Eliezer, but when he got halfway to the door, he stopped. Because that man standing in the threshold, that man was dressed in rags. It didn't look like his old friend. He said a few words to the doorman and went back to the feast, and the doorman came and said, "My master is not home." and closed the door in his face. When Abdallah came back to his wife, he said, "Why did you suggest I should go? The full belly does not remember the empty belly. He turned me away. He shut his door in my face." And that night, after he'd said his prayers, there was a knock at the door. And it was twilight. What the French have that expression, l'heure entre chien et loup, the hour between the dog and the wolf, when you can't see things as they are exactly. And there was a woman standing there, a young woman with a veil. He could see her standing there in the dusk. She stood there and she said, "I've heard that you're a good man, an honest man. Now, my husband sailed away on a journey. He hasn't come back. And now I need to sell these gemstones that I have. For whatever you've got to pay for them, I need to buy food for my children." And he looked at the gemstones as he said, "I have some savings, just a little bit left, but your gemstones are worth far more than I could give you." She said, "Take them. I can't make soup from gemstones. Give me whatever you have." And he bought the gemstones with their very last savings. She hurried off into the night, and he said, "I will share my profit with you." But she disappeared. He sold the gemstones the next day for great profit. And he said to his wife, "We are saved." The next night, there was another knock at the door. And another young woman. It was dark. It was dusk going into evening. And she also, with a veil, she said, "I've heard you're an honest man and a pious man, and I need your help. I'm a widow. I have a jewel. Would you buy it from me?" And he thought, "That jewel is worth so much." And he said, "It's worth more than I can give you," even with the money he had made the day before. And she said, "Give money, whatever you've got. That's what I need tonight." Buys it, and he says, "I will share my profit." But she's gone by now. And again he sells it, and now they are prosperous. But there's a third night, and another knock at the door. And now it's a young man standing there, and there are camels outside with beautiful textiles and carpets. And he said, "I'm a merchant from far away, and I'm wondering, I don't know the ways of this city. I've heard you're a good man, an honest man, a believer. Would you buy these things from me for whatever you've got? I'll sell them, for 50 dinars each." 50 dinars that were worth 500 each. But he bought them all. And now he became a merchant. He prospered. He did well. His children were thriving. And one day his wife said to him, "Thank God we are saved from our poverty and hunger. Now go back to Eliezer Effendi and spit in his face for how he treated you in our hour of need." And Abdallah said, "No, it's done. We have had our good fortune restored. Go to him," she said. And finally he listened. And he went to the beautiful palace. And now he himself, dressed in fine robes with a beautiful turban, and he came and presented himself. "Tell your master Eliezer, Abdallah has come back." And this time, when the message was given, he saw Eliezer rise from the banquet table and come hurrying all the way down the passageway and throw his arms open to embrace his old friend. "Abdallah, it is so good to see you again." And Abdallah said, "How dare you? I came to you in my hour of greatest need, and you closed your door in my face. I have come not to renew our friendship, but to renounce it forever." And he turned to leave. When Eliezer said, "Wait, before you go, I'd like you to meet my 3 children." And coming there to the threshold were 2 young women and a young man. And when Abdallah saw them, he recognized them. They had come to his house selling gemstones, jewels, and carpets and textiles. And he fainted. This is how I heard the story from Beatrice Grunland in Tel Aviv. He fainted. And when he awoke, they pulled him up to his feet, and he embraced Eliezer and said, "Why did you do this? Tell me why." And Eliezer said, "My friend, when I first saw you in your hunger and your desperation, I thought, if I give you money as a rich man gives to a beggar, you would never forget that. And perhaps neither would I. This way we meet as equals. My children gave you a little help, but your own resourcefulness and courage and faith helped you prosper again. Now we meet as equals, not as a rich man giving money to a beggar. Please forgive me. And they continued their friendship. And the story says in their friendship there were no borders. And may we have a world one day with fewer borders too.
And Yashinsky, everyone!